She walked into that shop like she owned the air every single person in that room was breathing. Silk blazer, $700 heels clicking against oil-stained concrete, and a voice cold enough to freeze engine coolant. She looked down at the man lying beneath a rusted pickup truck. Grease-black hands, faded uniform. Nobody, and she said it loud enough for every mechanic in that shop to hear. Do it, or get out. The room went dead silent. Every man there expected him to flinch, to apologize, to shrink. He didn't. What happened next didn't just shut her up. It changed everything she thought she knew about greatness. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels, and if you're new here, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss where this goes. The shop smelled like motor oil, burned rubber, and the particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't wash off in the shower. Ethan Carter had been under that pickup since 6:15 in the morning. It was now almost noon. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't complained. He'd been working in a silence so complete, so practiced, that the other 3 mechanics in the shop had stopped noticing he was even there, which was, in its own way, exactly how Ethan preferred it. He was 42 inches of crawl space, a drop light, a torque wrench, and the soft sound of a man who had learned to live entirely inside his own head. His daughter Lily had called him at 7:40. He'd taken the call lying flat on his back, holding the phone above his face with one grease-covered hand. Daddy, I can't find my purple folder. Third shelf, behind the big library book about dolphins. A pause. How did you even know that? Because I'm your dad. That's my job. Now go eat breakfast. The oatmeal's in the pot. I hate oatmeal. I know you do, sweetheart. Eat it anyway. She'd huffed that specific 8-year-old sound that's equal parts indignation and love and hung up. And Ethan had smiled at the ceiling of that truck's undercarriage for exactly 3 seconds before getting back to work. That was the rhythm of his life now. Small moments, practical love, the sound of a child's voice as a compass point. Lily Carter had been born with a congenital heart defect, a partial atrioventricular canal defect that her cardiologist, Dr. Reeves, over at St. Catherine's Medical Center, had been monitoring since she was 11 days old. She'd had one surgery at age 3, another at age 5. Her heart was functional now, more than functional. Dr. Reeves said remarkable, but she required quarterly checkups, a carefully managed schedule, and a parent who was present. Not available by phone, not reachable by email, actually physically geographically present. That had been the calculation Ethan had run in his head the night after they buried his wife Sarah. Not a grief calculation, a logistics calculation. Because grief, he had learned, will eat you alive if you let it become the only math you're doing. So he'd run the numbers instead. Aerospace Systems Engineering position at Meridian Defense. Contractors in Virginia, $340,000. Base salary, full benefits, 60 to 80 hours per week. Minimum frequent travel to test facilities in 3 states. No flexibility for school pickups or cardiology appointments or a sick child at 2 in the morning. Head mechanic at Carter Brothers. Auto, his uncle's shop in Denton, Ohio. $38,000 a year. No prestige, no patents, no conference rooms, but 10 minutes from Lily's school, 8 minutes from St. Catherine's, and a boss who happened to be family, and who would never once question Ethan leaving early if his daughter needed him. He'd chosen Lily. He'd never once looked back. He'd cut. That wasn't a sacrifice he talked about. He didn't need anyone to understand it or applaud it or feel sorry for him. It was simply what a father did. What this father did. The other mechanics at Carter Brothers knew Ethan was smart. You couldn't spend 6 months working beside a man without picking up on that. But they didn't know the full scope of it. Didn't know about the patents. Didn't know about the aerospace division he'd built from scratch. Didn't know that his published paper on distributed electrical fault systems in autonomous aerospace vehicles had been cited over 200 times in engineering literature. They knew he was quiet. They knew he was reliable. They knew he could diagnose an engine problem in less time than it took most people to find the hood release. And they knew he made the best coffee in the shop, which in the hierarchy of mechanic culture counted for a great deal. Marcus Webb, 26 years old, loud, perpetually coffee-stained, the shop's self-appointed social director, had once asked Ethan directly, "Bro, why are you even here? Like, no offense, but you could be doing something better, right?" Ethan had looked at him for a moment. Then he'd said, "This is better." Marcus had decided that was a weird answer and never brought it up again. The sound that interrupted that Tuesday came from outside. It was the kind of sound a car makes when it doesn't want to be where it is, a low grinding electrical stutter that would have been inaudible under normal shop noise, but the shop happened to be quiet at that particular moment, and Ethan heard it through the concrete floor before he heard it through the air. He registered it the way he registered most things, quietly, completely, and without any visible reaction. He was still processing the sound, running it against his internal catalog of electrical failure signatures when the door opened. He heard the heels first, sharp, deliberate, the specific cadence of someone who expected floor space to clear in front of them. Then the voice. "I need someone in charge, now." Rick Calloway, the shop manager, 20 years behind the counter, unflappable as a chunk of granite, said in his customary tone of mild inconvenience, "Yes, ma'am. Can I help you?" "My vehicle is outside. It's been to 4 dealerships in the past 3 days. None of them could diagnose it. I need it fixed today, this afternoon." "We're pretty backed up today. I can take a look tomorrow morning, and—" "I didn't say tomorrow morning. I said today." Ethan, who was still underneath the pickup truck, heard the air in the room change. That specific pressurized silence of men waiting to see how their manager handled a difficult customer. Rick's voice came back careful and even. "Ma'am, I understand you're in a hurry, but I've got 3 vehicles ahead of—" "Do you know who I am?" A pause. "I'm afraid I don't, ma'am. My name is Victoria Ashford. I'm the CEO of Ashford Technologies. That vehicle outside is a prototype executive transport worth roughly $4 million. It has a proprietary electrical architecture that your standard diagnostic equipment will not read. I don't need standard. I need someone who can think." Another pause. The kind that said Rick was doing math. Ethan heard Marcus mutter something under his breath from across the shop floor. Heard Danny Chen, the youngest mechanic, 22, fresh out of trade school, shift his weight on the concrete. And then Victoria Ashford's heels moved, clicked deliberately across the floor, stopped. Directly beside the pickup truck. Directly beside him. He saw her feet from underneath the vehicle. Italian leather. Probably $400 minimum, maybe more. Not a scuff on them. Her voice came down from above him, and it was not the voice of a person accustomed to looking downward when they spoke. "You. Under the truck." Ethan continued what he was doing for exactly 2 more seconds, tightening a fitting that needed tightening, before he stopped. "Yes, ma'am." "Are you the best mechanic here?" He thought about that honestly. "Probably. Probably," she repeated, and he could hear the faint involuntary curl of disdain in it. "That's reassuring. There's a vehicle outside. $4 million of prototype engineering that 4 dealerships couldn't diagnose. I need it fixed. Today. I've got a vehicle I'm currently working on. I'll pay double your shop rate." "It's not about the rate, ma'am. I told this customer his truck would be ready by 3 o'clock. A beat of silence. "Are you seriously telling me?" "Yes, ma'am." The silence after that was a different kind. Ethan heard Rick take a quiet, slightly panicked breath. Heard Marcus make a sound like a man watching a fuse burn toward something. Victoria Ashford had not been told no in quite some time. That much was audible in the silence itself. When she spoke again, her voice had sharpened to something fine-edged and cold. "Let me be very clear. I will pay whatever this shop charges double in cash today, but I need that vehicle examined now. So you can do it." She paused, and when the next words came, they were measured and deliberate and loud enough to land in every corner of that shop. Or, you can get out from under that truck, pack your toolbox, and get out of my shop. It landed exactly the way she'd intended it to land. The room went to stone. Danny Chen stopped breathing. Marcus went still. Rick stood behind the counter, with the face of a man who has just watched a meteorite enter the atmosphere and has no idea where it's going to hit. Every mechanic in Carter Brothers Auto was waiting for Ethan Carter to flinch. He didn't flinch. What he did instead was finish tightening the fitting he'd been working on. 14 foot-pounds. He counted it in his head. Done. Then he slid out from beneath the truck. Not fast, not slow. Just the smooth, practiced movement of a man who does this 17 times a day and sees no reason to make it theatrical. He stood up to his full height, 6'1" broader through the shoulders than his uniform quite fit, and he looked at Victoria Ashford for the first time. She was looking back at him the way people sometimes looked at things they'd expected to be smaller. He didn't say anything to her. He picked up a shop rag from the workbench beside him, wiped his hands with it, methodical corner to corner, and then he turned and walked toward the door that led to the parking lot. Victoria turned and followed. The other mechanics exchanged glances. Marcus mouthed something to Danny. Rick reached for his coffee mug and found it empty. Outside, the sun was flat and white and warm. The vehicle in the lot was unlike anything Ethan had seen in a public parking space. Matte graphite finish, low aerodynamic profile. The kind of silence around it that high-end materials produce, sound-dampening panels, tight seals, no rattles. It was somewhere between a luxury executive sedan and a concept car, and it sat on the asphalt of a small-town Ohio repair shop parking lot, like a piece of the future that had taken a wrong turn. Ethan walked to it. He didn't touch it yet. He stood beside it for a moment with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes moving across the exterior, not casually, but with the particular quality of attention he usually kept invisible. Victoria stood back, arms crossed, watching him. "The hood release," he said. "There," she pointed. "The panel beneath the driver's side mirror." He found it. The hood opened with a pneumatic hiss, and he looked down at an engine bay that looked less like an automobile and more like the interior of a flight computer. He stood there for 37 seconds. He counted them later. He wasn't counting at the time. At the time, he was simply reading what was in front of him, not just the hardware, but the logic of the system, the architecture of how it had been designed to communicate with itself. He saw it on the second sweep. A secondary ground relay positioned along the left side power distribution rail, seated in a housing that had been designed for a predecessor component and never fully updated in the integration specification. The relay's terminal contact was experiencing intermittent resistance under thermal load, which meant it performed perfectly during cold start diagnostics when every dealership's computer would check it, and degraded to a fault state only after 7 to 9 minutes of operation when the underhood temperature reached a specific threshold. It was the kind of failure that was genuinely invisible to standard diagnostic protocol. It was also, from a systems design perspective, a completely predictable integration, a completely predictable integration flaw. He reached in. Carefully, with 2 fingers, he pressed against the relay housing. The contact shifted fractionally under the pressure. "There," he said quietly. Victoria had moved without seeming to move and was now standing slightly behind his left shoulder. "What?" "Your ground relay, right side terminal of the secondary power distribution relay on the left rail." He stood back up. "It's losing contact under thermal load. Happens after about 8 minutes of running. It only throws a ghost fault. Nothing your diagnostic system can latch onto cleanly because by the time you pull over and plug in the reader, the engine's cooling and the contact's already recovered." Victoria stared at him. "That's..." She stopped. "It's a housing integration issue. Looks like this relay was spec'd for a previous generation component and wasn't updated when the power architecture changed. The tolerance gap in the housing is letting the terminal creep under heat expansion. He paused. You want me to fix it or just tell you what it is? She said nothing for a full 4 seconds. Fix it, she said. He fixed it. 22 minutes. A proper spec relay housing sourced from 2 different donor components. He adapted by hand, a contact, reseating a thermal load test. He ran by cycling the system 4 times with a portable temperature monitor clamped to the rail. Victoria stood in the parking lot the entire time. She didn't check her phone. She didn't make calls. She just watched him work. When he closed the hood and wiped his hands and said, "Try it now." She got in the vehicle, started it, ran it for 12 minutes with the onboard system active. It didn't fault. For the first time all week, it simply ran. She got out, stood in front of him in the afternoon sun, and for a moment, just a moment, the architecture of her face did something she probably hadn't intended it to do. It softened. Then it didn't. "What do I owe you?" she said. "Standard diagnostic and repair rate. Rick at the front desk will write it up." That's... She almost said not enough. He could see her catch it. Fine. She walked back inside. He walked back inside. He slid back underneath the pickup truck and finished the job he'd promised to have done by 3 o'clock. He had it done by 2:47. At 4:15, after Victoria Ashford and her $4 million prototype had driven out of the lot and disappeared back toward whatever world she came from. Marcus Webb sat down on the bench beside Ethan's station and stared at the floor. "Okay," Marcus said. Ethan waited. "What was that?" "What was what?" "What you just did, to that car, that whole thing." Ethan picked up a wrench and examined it, set it down. "Electrical fault diagnosis." "Ethan, bro, I've been working in shops for 4 years. I've never seen someone look at an engine for 30 seconds and just..." Marcus waved his hand. "Like what was that? Where did you learn that?" Ethan considered the question. "A long time ago," he said. "Different job." Marcus waited, clearly hoping for more. More didn't come. Marcus stood up, eventually shook his head, walked back to his station. "Man," he said to nobody in particular, "that woman was something." "Hmm?" Ethan said. "You weren't scared of her even a little." Ethan thought about a Tuesday morning 3 years ago when a cardiologist had sat across from him in a beige consultation room and told him that his daughter's second surgery carried a 12% mortality risk, and he'd had to sit in that chair and not fall apart because Lily was in the next room and needed to see him steady. He thought about the night Sarah died, the specific quality of silence in a hospital room after the machines go quiet, and driving home alone at 3 in the morning, knowing that a 7-year-old girl was asleep in her bed and she was going to wake up and ask where mommy was. He thought about standing in the kitchen at 5 a.m., making oatmeal he didn't want to eat either, deciding that the only thing left to decide was what kind of father he was going to be. "No," he said. "I wasn't scared of her." Marcus looked at him strangely. "Why not?" Ethan folded the shop rag and set it on the bench. "Because she was just a person having a bad day," he said. He picked up the next work order. He got back to work. Through the dirty windows of Carter Brothers Auto, the afternoon light was starting to go gold the way it did in October, slanting through the glass and laying itself out across the oil-stained floor. And Ethan worked in it without noticing it. At 5:30, he would clock out. At 5:55, he would be standing outside Lily's after-school program. She would come through the door with her backpack bouncing and her purple folder clutched in both hands, and she would say, "Daddy," the way she always said it, like it was still a surprise and a relief and a piece of joy she hadn't quite gotten used to. And he would pick her up, even though she was getting almost too big for that, and she would wrap her arms around his neck, and he would carry her to the car. That was the life he'd chosen. That was the whole point. He didn't know at 5:30 on that particular Tuesday that Victoria Ashford had not gone home. He didn't know she'd driven 3 blocks, pulled over in a strip mall parking lot, and spent 17 minutes sitting in her prototype vehicle, trying to work out how a mechanic in a faded uniform at a small-town shop had done in 22 minutes what 4 of her company's authorized dealership engineers had failed to do in 3 days. He didn't know she had already pulled out her phone and told her executive assistant to find out everything there was to know about the mechanics at Carter Brothers Auto in Denton, Ohio. He didn't know any of that. He was already in his car driving toward his daughter, which was, as far as he was concerned, exactly where he was supposed to be. The next morning came the way all mornings came for Ethan Carter, with an alarm at 5:15, a kitchen that was too quiet, and the particular weight of a house that held 2 people where it used to hold 3. He stood at the stove making oatmeal and listening to the sound of Lily getting herself dressed in the room down the hall. She was getting better at that. Better at a lot of things. She'd started laying out her own clothes the night before. Shoes by the door, backpack, zipped purple folder on top, and every time he noticed it, it hit him in the chest in a way he didn't have a name for. Pride and sadness at the same time. The particular ache of watching a child learn to need you slightly less. He heard her door open, heard the specific slap of her sneakers on the hallway floor. She never quite lifted her feet enough. Sarah used to comment on it, said she got it from him, and then she appeared in the kitchen doorway in her green jacket with her hair half done, 1 braid completed and 1 side still loose. "Can you?" she said, holding up the hair tie. "Come here." She stood in front of him while he turned the stove to low and worked the second braid with both hands. He'd learned to braid hair the same way he'd learned to read cardiac monitor readings and pack school lunches, and understand the emotional difference between a cry that meant hurt and a cry that meant scared out of necessity without complaint until it became as natural as breathing. "Mrs. Garland says we have a science project," Lily said. "What kind?" "About electricity, how it works." He finished the braid, secured the tie. "What do you want to know about it?" She tilted her head back to look up at him. "Everything." He smiled. It was small the way his smiles usually were, but it reached his eyes. "Okay, we'll start tonight." He didn't know yet that the day that was just beginning was going to reach into his life and rearrange things in ways that no amount of planning could have prepared him for. He didn't know that 22 miles across town, in an office on the 14th floor of a glass building that reflected the morning sky. Back at itself, Victoria Ashford was already at her desk, already reading, and already unsatisfied with what she'd found. She'd gotten the preliminary background on Carter Brothers Auto the previous evening. Standard business registration. Tax records. Rick Calloway listed as manager. 3 full-time mechanics. All routine. All unremarkable. Except for 1 name. Ethan James Carter. Age 35. Current occupation mechanic. Previous employment history incomplete. There was a gap. A significant one. 7 years of professional record that trailed off into almost nothing. A few scattered references, a forwarding address, change, a professional license that had quietly lapsed. Before the gap, though. Before it. That was where things got interesting. She'd called her head of talent acquisition at 7:30 in the morning. His name was Gerald Fitch, and he was very good at his job, and he sounded appropriately startled to be called before 8. "I need everything you can find on someone," she said. "Full background, professional history, publications, patents, affiliations, education. Everything that exists." Of course. Name. Ethan Carter, 35. Was living in the Virginia area approximately 7 or 8 years ago. Prior to that, likely an engineering background. "I want everything." "I can have a preliminary report by end of day." "I want it by noon, Gerald." A pause. "Yes, ma'am." She hung up. She stood at the window of her office with her coffee cooling in her hand and looked out at the city that was still waking itself up below her. She was not a person who spent time on things that didn't matter. She knew that about herself. It was a quality she considered a strength. So why was she still thinking about a mechanic in a faded uniform who hadn't flinched when she told him to get out? She went back to her desk. She had a board meeting in 2 hours and 3 reports she hadn't finished reading. She told herself to focus. She read 17 lines of the first report before her mind went back to the parking lot. Back to the 37 seconds he'd stood above that engine without touching it. Back to the specific quality of his attention, the way his eyes had moved across the components, not randomly, but in a sequence like someone reading a language everyone else in the room didn't speak. She put down the report. She pulled up the preliminary file her assistant had managed to assemble overnight. Mo. And on page 3, buried under a business address and a lapsed professional license, she found the first thread. A co-author credit on a published engineering paper. A systems analysis paper from 8 years ago in the Journal of Aerospace Electrical Engineering. The lead author was listed as Dr. Marcus Holloway of Meridian Defense Contractors. The second author was listed as E.J. Carter, Senior Systems Engineer. She read the paper's title twice. Distributed Fault. Isolation in Autonomous Aerospace. Power Distribution Networks. A Thermal Load Analysis. She sat very still for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee, found it cold, set it back down, and reached for her phone. Across town, 22 miles away, Ethan was lying underneath a 2019 Ford Explorer with a bad CV axle and thinking about nothing except the CV axle. That was how it was when the work was straightforward. His mind went quiet. It was one of the things he valued about this life, the particular mercy of problems that had clean solutions. He heard Rick's voice from the front. "Ethan, you got a call." "Take a message." "It's the Ashford woman, from yesterday." He stayed still for a moment. Then he slid out. Rick held the shop phone toward him with an expression that suggested mild alarm. Ethan took it. "Carter," he said. "Mr. Carter." Her voice was different on the phone. Still precise, still controlled, but the edge of yesterday had shifted into something else. Something that might, if you were generous, be called careful. "This is Victoria Ashford. You repaired my vehicle yesterday." "I remember." "I wanted to follow up. The vehicle has been running without fault since yesterday evening. 12 hours of operation, no issues." "Good." A pause. A very deliberate pause. "I'd like to understand how you diagnosed that fault so quickly." "Experience," Ethan said. "Mr. Carter." Another pause. He had the sense of a person choosing words with the precision of someone who didn't usually have to choose carefully. "I had 4 engineers with advanced degrees from accredited programs working with state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment look at that vehicle over 3 days. None of them found what you found in 30 seconds. They were looking at the diagnostic data," Ethan said. "I looked at the system." Silence on the line. "I'm sorry. Diagnostic data tells you where the system thinks the problem is. That's not always the same as where the problem actually is, especially in integrated architectures, where the fault isolation logic wasn't updated alongside the hardware revision." He paused. "Your relay housing was spec'd for a previous generation component. The fault tolerance logic still referenced the old thermal parameters. So when the new relay ran hot under load and dropped resistance, the fault isolation system was looking for a signature it was never going to find." More silence, longer this time. "How do you know about the hardware revision history on a proprietary prototype?" "I don't," Ethan said. "I could see the housing didn't match the component. The tolerances were off. That told me the rest." He could hear her breathing. He could hear her deciding something. "Mr. Carter," she said finally, "I'd like to meet with you, at your convenience. I work until 5:30. "I'll come to you." He blinked. Victoria Ashford, CEO of a billion-dollar technology company, coming to a mechanic shop in Denton, Ohio, twice in 2 days. He absorbed that. "All right," he said. She arrived at 4:45. This time, she didn't wear heels. She wore flat leather boots and dark slacks, and a coat she'd clearly grabbed in a hurry, and she walked into Carter Brothers Auto without the same performance of the previous day. No announcement. No commanding the room. She came in like a person who had somewhere specific to be. She sat across from Ethan at the workbench he used for paperwork. He'd washed his hands. He had a cup of coffee. He didn't offer her one. "I'm going to be direct," she said. "I'd prefer that. I've had someone looking into your background." He didn't react. He'd expected this. "Okay." E.J. Carter, co-author. Distributed Fault Isolation in Autonomous Aerospace Power Distribution Networks. She watched his face. "That's you. That's me. You were a senior systems engineer at Meridian Defense. Before that, Johns Hopkins Aerospace Engineering graduated top of your class. You hold 3 patents on distributed electrical fault detection systems. Your work is cited in the current DoD autonomous vehicle specification." She paused. "And then 7 years ago you disappeared." Ethan looked at her steadily. "I didn't disappear. I moved to Ohio." "Why?" "My wife got sick," he said. The words were matter-of-fact, not cold, but contained the way a person speaks about something they've had time to make peace with. "And then she died. And I have a daughter who needed a parent who was actually there." Victoria sat with that. For a moment, just a moment, her face did what it had done briefly in the parking lot the day before. Something behind the executive composure shifted. "I'm sorry," she said, and it sounded, he noticed, genuine. "Thank you." "Your daughter. She's 8. She's healthy. She's brilliant." He paused. "She wants to know everything about electricity as of this morning." Something happened at the corner of Victoria's mouth. It wasn't quite a smile. It was something adjacent to one. "That seems like good genetics at work." He almost smiled back. Almost. "Mr. Carter," she said, returning to whatever she'd come to say, "I'm not here to convince you to change your life. I'm here because I have a problem." "Tell me the problem." "Duh." She took a breath. This, he sensed, was the part she'd been organizing on the drive over. "My company's autonomous vehicle division has a project that's been in development for 4 years. We're 8 weeks from the first government performance evaluation. Yesterday I found out we've got a system-level electrical fault that none of my engineers can isolate. It's been causing intermittent power distribution failures in the control layer. Inconsistent temperature-dependent ghost reading." Sound familiar? Ethan was quiet. "It's costing us roughly $80,000 a day in halted production," she continued. "And if we don't have the fault resolved before the evaluation, we lose the contract. The contract is worth $240 million. The number sat between them on the workbench. "What's your engineering team's current hypothesis?" Ethan said. "Software. They've been chasing a software bug for 6 weeks." He exhaled slowly. "Is it software? I don't think so." "Why not?" "Because I read your paper last night," she said. "The one from 8 years ago. And the fault signature they're describing in the telemetry matches almost exactly the failure mode you identified in distributed aerospace power systems." She leaned forward slightly. "It's hardware, isn't it?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Probably," he said. She looked at him. "Same answer as yesterday." "Same confidence level," he said. This time she did almost smile. "What would it take for you to look at it?" "When?" "Saturday. I'll have the full vehicle available. My lead engineer will be there. You'd have access to everything telemetry data system specifications, the hardware architecture documentation." He thought about Saturday. Lily had a checkup at St. Catherine's at 10. He'd promised her lunch after wherever she wanted. She'd been saying Applebee's for 3 weeks, which said something about the quality of her taste, but he wasn't going to argue. "Afternoon," he said. "After 2. Done. And I'm not signing any NDAs until I've had a lawyer look at them." She blinked. Of course. And I'm not changing jobs. I'm not consulting. I'm coming to look at a machine the same as yesterday. She studied him. Understood. Then I'll be there Saturday. She nodded. She stood up. She extended her hand across the workbench, and he shook it, and her grip was firm and direct, and exactly what he would have predicted. She was almost to the door when he said, "Ms. Ashford." She turned. "When you find the fault," he said, "it's going to be in your power distribution layer. Somewhere in the control bus interface. Something changed in the hardware. A component revision, a tolerance update, a spec change, and the fault isolation architecture wasn't updated to match." She stared at him. "That's what I'd look for," he said. She walked out. Marcus materialized from behind a truck approximately 4 seconds later. Did she come back? Is she? "I have somewhere to be Saturday," Ethan said. He picked up the next work order. "You're covering my afternoon." "I'm what? Why, where are you going?" "To look at a machine." "What kind of machine?" Ethan looked at the work order. "A complicated one." Marcus stared at the door Victoria had just walked through. He stared at Ethan. He stared at the door again. "Man," he said, "for the 4th time in 2 days. You are the weirdest guy I've ever met." Ethan didn't argue. Saturday arrived. He dropped Lily at St. Catherine's at 9:50, sat beside her in the waiting room, while she read a library book about dolphins. She'd moved on from the dinosaur phase entirely, which he was privately relieved about. And when Dr. Reeves came out and gave him the quarterly update, the words were the same words they'd been for the last 4 appointments. "Heart function is excellent. We'll see you in 3 months." Lily pumped her fist when Ethan told her in the parking lot. "Applebee's," she said. "Applebee's," he confirmed. She got her mozzarella sticks and her lemonade, and she sat across from him in the booth and told him everything that had happened in the past week. School friends, a conflict with a girl named Paige that seemed to involve a disagreement over whose turn it was to be the lead in some game. Ethan didn't fully understand. A book she'd read and loved. Something Marcus had said when he'd picked her up one afternoon that she found hilarious, and he sat across from her and listened, and watched her talk and thought not for the first time that this was the most important meeting he'd attend all week. She asked him where he was going at 2 o'clock. He'd mentioned he had something to look at. "A complicated machine," he said, same as he'd told Marcus. "What kind?" "An autonomous vehicle. Self-driving. It has an electrical problem nobody's been able to find." Her eyes lit up. "Like the ones we talked about, distributed power systems." Chine. He'd spent 2 evenings this week at the kitchen table with her walking through the basics of electrical architecture. She'd absorbed it with the particular focused hunger of a child whose mind had found something it recognized as its own. "Exactly like that," he said. "What's wrong with it?" "I think a hardware revision created a thermal fault pathway that the diagnostic system wasn't updated to detect." She thought about this with complete seriousness. "So the car doesn't know what to look for." "Right. So it can't find the problem because it's looking for the wrong thing." "That's it, exactly." She nodded slowly. "That's like when I was looking for my purple folder, and I kept checking my room because I thought I left it there, but actually I'd left it in the car." He looked at her across the table. "Exactly like that," he said quietly. She went back to her mozzarella sticks, satisfied with the analogy. He sat there for a moment just looking at her before he picked up his fork. The Ashford Technologies campus was 40 minutes from the restaurant. He arrived at 2:10. The security guard at the entrance had his name on a list, which still surprised him slightly being on a list anywhere, and he was escorted through a building that was all glass interior walls and clean floors, and the specific hum of serious engineering at work. Victoria met him at the entrance to the vehicle development bay. She was in work clothes this time, no blazer, dark jeans, technical shirt with the company logo. She looked, he thought, more comfortable in it than she'd looked in the silk the day she'd walked into his shop. "Thank you for coming," she said. She meant it. He could tell. "Let's see the machine," he said. The vehicle in the bay was a full autonomous transport platform, considerably larger than her prototype executive vehicle built for the government evaluation she'd described. It sat on a test stand connected to a forest of diagnostic cables monitors, displaying telemetry data in a dozen windows. 3 engineers were standing near a workstation on the far side. They looked up when Ethan walked in. They had the specific expression of people who had been told that help was coming and had privately, politely, completely disbelieved it. One of them, tall mid-40s, the kind of precisely maintained beard that said, detail-oriented, stepped forward. "Jonathan Reyes, lead systems engineer." He extended a hand. His handshake was professional and barely warm. "Victoria tells me you have a theory about the fault." "I have a direction," Ethan said, "not a theory yet. Can I see the telemetry logs? All of them, not the filtered summary." Reyes hesitated, just barely. "Of course." He gestured toward the workstation. Ethan sat down at the monitor. He started reading. The room went quiet. Damn. Not the awkward quiet of people who don't know what to say. The specific quiet of engineers watching another engineer work, which is its own form of professional attention. They watched his eyes move across the data. They watched him scroll back, stop scroll, forward, stop again. They watched him pull up a secondary window, the hardware revision log, without being shown where it was, because the file architecture was logical, and he'd navigated it the same way he navigated any well-organized system. 4 minutes passed. Jonathan Reyes shifted his weight. One of the other engineers leaned toward him and murmured something. Victoria stood near the wall with her arms crossed and her eyes on Ethan. 6 minutes. Then Ethan stopped scrolling. He sat very still for a moment. "When did you update the thermal management controller firmware?" he said. Reyes blinked. "Approximately 8 weeks ago. Why?" "Did that update include a revised thermal threshold table?" As Reyes looked at the other engineers. "It may have. The update was primarily a security patch, but there were secondary parameter adjustments." "Did anyone check whether the fault isolation logic in the power distribution controller was calibrated against the new thermal thresholds?" The silence that followed that question was a very specific kind of silence. Yes, it was the silence of a room full of smart people who have just realized simultaneously that they have all been looking in exactly the wrong direction. "The control bus interface," Ethan said, and his voice was level and unhurried, the voice of a man describing something he is reading rather than something he is discovering. "Your power distribution fault, isolation architecture, is checking for a fault signature that references the old thermal threshold parameters, but the firmware update changed those parameters. So, when a genuine thermal fault develops in the control bus here, at the junction between the primary and secondary distribution rail, the fault isolation system checks it against the old threshold, doesn't see a match, and clears it as a ghost reading." He pointed at the screen. The data was right there, had been right there the whole time. "It's not a software bug," he said. "It's a calibration mismatch between a firmware update and a hardware fault detection parameter. The hardware is fine. The software is fine. They just stopped speaking the same language 8 weeks ago, and nobody noticed." Another silence. Then Jonathan Reyes let out a breath that contained in its specific quality about 6 weeks of accumulated stress and sleeplessness. "How long to correct it?" Victoria said. She was looking at Reyes. Reyes was looking at the screen. "If he's right..." He stopped, looked at Ethan. "Are you right?" "Run a controlled thermal load test on the primary control bus," Ethan said. "You'll reproduce the fault. When the diagnostic clears, it look at the threshold value it checked against. If it's referencing firmware version 7.2 parameters in a system running version 8.1, you've got your answer." Reyes turned to his team. Something passed between them, a look, a nod, the rapid reorientation of 3 very capable engineers who have just been given a new coordinate. "Do it," Reyes said. The test took 11 minutes. The fault reproduced on the third thermal cycle exactly as Ethan had described. The diagnostic cleared it. The threshold value it referenced was version 7.2. The system was running 8.1. The fix, a parameter recalibration and fault threshold update, took one of the engineers 40 minutes to implement and test. 40 minutes. After 6 weeks of chasing the wrong answer. Reyes stood at the workstation when it was done, staring at the clean telemetry readout, and he rubbed his face with both hands in the way of a man who is very tired and has just been given permission to stop. 6 weeks, he said, to no one in particular. 6 weeks. He turned and looked at Ethan. "Who are you?" he said. Not rude, not resentful, genuinely asking. The way a person asks when the category they thought they understood has just been revised. Ethan stood up from the workstation. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "A mechanic," he said. Victoria walked him out. They stood in the parking structure in the fluorescent quiet, and she had the look of a person who has been running at full speed for a long time and has just momentarily stopped. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't need to." You don't. You saved this company roughly $11 million in contract penalty exposure, not counting the evaluation, not counting the production losses. "I looked at a machine," he said. "Same as always." She was quiet for a moment. "Why are you a mechanic, Ethan?" He looked at her. It was the first time she'd used his first name. "Because my daughter lives in Denton, Ohio," he said. "And this is where I want to be." She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted, not softened exactly, but recalibrated. The way a measurement instrument adjusts when it encounters a value it wasn't expecting. "You know," she said carefully, "there are people in my company, in my industry, who would give a great deal to have access to the way your mind works. I'm sure there are. Sure there. I'm not offering you a job," she said quickly. "I understand. I'm just—" She stopped. "I misjudged you, on Tuesday, when I walked into your shop. You didn't know me." "That's not an excuse." He looked at her for a moment. "No," he agreed. "It's not." She nodded. It was the nod of someone accepting a fair correction without flinching. "I'll have a check sent to the shop Monday," she said. "For your time. Rick'll handle the billing." "Of course." She paused. "Ethan." He waited. "Thank you." He drove home in the early dark of October, the highway quiet, the radio low. He thought about Lily. He thought about the way she'd set it so the car doesn't know what to look for, and he thought about how she'd gotten there completely on her own, from a conversation at a kitchen table over a bowl of oatmeal she didn't want to eat. He thought she's going to be something extraordinary. Wow. He didn't know yet that Victoria Ashford was already on the phone as he drove, already talking to her head of intelligence in a voice that had lost its professional flatness, already saying the words that would change everything. He didn't know. But the highway was quiet, and the radio was low, and he was driving home to his daughter, and for right now, that was everything. The check arrived Monday morning the way Victoria said it would. Rick brought it back to Ethan's station without saying anything, just set it face down on the workbench, the way he handled things he wasn't sure how to handle. Ethan picked it up, turned it over, read the number. He set it back down. Rick was still standing there. "That's not a normal amount of money for a diagnostic consult," he said carefully. "No," Ethan agreed. "That's like Ethan. That's more than what this shop grosses in 2 months." "I know what it is, Rick." "So what are you going to do with it?" Ethan thought about Lily's next cardiology appointment. Thought about the conversation he'd had with Dr. Reeves 3 months ago about a new monitoring device, a small implantable cardiac loop recorder that would give them real-time data between quarterly visits, Catch anything irregular the moment it happened, instead of waiting for the next appointment to find out. Insurance covered 60%. The remaining 40 was a number that Ethan had been doing quiet math on for weeks. "I know what I'm going to do with it," he said. Rick looked at him for a long moment, nodded once, walked back to the front counter. Marcus, who had been pretending to inventory a parts drawer approximately 4 feet away, said, "I wasn't listening." "Yes, you were." "Okay, I was." "Ethan, come on. You gotta tell me something. Because I have watched you diagnose 3 vehicles this morning in the time it takes me to find the right socket, and now you're cashing checks from billion-dollar companies, and I don't bro, who are you?" Ethan put the check in his shirt pocket. "A mechanic," he said. Same answer as always. Marcus threw his hands up, turned back to the parts drawer. "That's not an answer," he said to the drawer. "It's the only one I've got," Ethan said, and went back to work. But across town, in the glass building, with the 14th floor office that caught the morning light, Victoria Ashford was getting answers that Ethan hadn't given anyone. Gerald Fitch had come through. He always came through. It was why she paid him what she paid him, but this time he'd come through with something that had made her set down her coffee and read the same page 3 times to make sure she was reading it correctly. The file on Ethan James Carter was 41 pages. She'd asked for everything. Gerald had delivered everything. And what it contained was not the story of an ordinary man who happened to know his way around an engine. The patents came first. 3 of them filed between 7 and 9 years ago, all co-assigned with Meridian Defense Contractors. The first covered a novel fault isolation architecture for distributed power systems in autonomous aerospace platforms. The second was a refinement of the first with expanded application to ground-based autonomous vehicles. The third, and this was the one that made Victoria read the page 3 times, was a foundational method patent for real-time thermal fault detection in integrated electrical systems. The kind of patent that other engineers built on top of the kind that showed up in citation lists, the way a cornerstone shows up in a building. It was cited in 47 subsequent patents across 9 companies. One of those companies was Ashford Technologies. She sat with that fact for a full minute. Her own company's intellectual property rested in part on a patent held by the man she had told to get out of his shop 5 days ago. Then came the employment record. Senior Systems Engineer at Meridian. Before that, a 2-year research fellowship at the NASA Langley Research Center. Before that, Johns Hopkins Aerospace Engineering magna cum laude. And before Meridian, a brief consulting assignment, she almost missed it in the file for a joint DoD-DARPA Autonomous Systems Working Group. The kind of assignment that didn't appear in press releases. The kind that existed in files marked sensitive. Then the gap. Gerald had found the reason for the gap in a way that felt almost indecent to read. A hospital record summary legally obtained through a personal records request process that Ethan himself had apparently filed in relation to a life insurance matter. Sarah Ann Carter, age 31. Diagnosis treatment timeline death certificate. And attached to it, a notation from Meridian's HR department. Voluntary resignation, no severance dispute. Departure effective within 2 weeks of the spouse's death. He'd walked away from everything in 2 weeks. Not because he was forced out. Not because the career had stalled. Because a 7-year-old girl had needed a father more than the aerospace industry had needed one more brilliant engineer. Victoria closed the file. She sat at her desk in the quiet of early morning and she thought about Tuesday. About walking into Carter Brothers Auto in her silk blazer and her Italian leather heels and saying what she'd said. She thought about the way the room had gone quiet. About the way Ethan had slid out from under that truck, not rushing, not performing, just moving with the calm of someone who had decided a long time ago that other people's opinions of him were not the relevant variable. She thought about the paper. Distributed Fault Isolation in Autonomous Aerospace Power Distribution Networks. She'd read it twice over the weekend. It was 10 years old, and it was still in its core methodology, more elegant than anything her own engineering team had produced in the past 3 years. She thought about Saturday afternoon, about watching him sit down at that workstation and read 6 weeks of telemetry data in 6 minutes and find in it what 3 engineers hadn't found in 42 days. She thought about what he'd said when Reyes asked who he was. A mechanic. She picked up her phone, put it down, picked it up again, put it down. She was not a person who made decisions impulsively. She was not a person who acted on emotion. She had spent 20 years making sure she was a person who assessed, calculated, and moved with precision. But there was something sitting in her chest that she didn't have a category for. Something that felt uncomfortably like shame. She picked up the phone, called Gerald. "The file on Carter," she said when he answered. "Is it complete?" "As complete as I can make it publicly. There are some things that would require—" "There's a third party," she said. "Someone who contacted Meridian Defense approximately 7 years ago shortly after Carter resigned. Someone who made an inquiry about his patent assignments. I'd need more to go on. The patents. Who benefits most if Carter's patent claims are ever disputed or invalidated?" A pause. Gerald was careful and thorough, and he didn't answer questions he hadn't thought through. "I'd need to run that. It would take a day, maybe 2. "Do it," she said. She didn't know yet why she was asking. It was instinct, the same instinct that had built her company from a 12-person startup to a 1,400-person corporation. The sense that a thread once noticed needed to be followed. She put the phone down and opened her calendar. She had a board meeting Thursday. The quarterly evaluation from the government contract team was now scheduled for 6 weeks out. Instead of 8, the production line was running again. The fault was fixed. The momentum had resumed. Everything was back on track. And yet she felt with the specific unease of someone who has learned to trust their own instincts that something wasn't finished. She was right. Wednesday came and went. Thursday arrived with the board meeting, which ran long and contentious in the way board meetings do when a company has spent 6 weeks bleeding production costs and the board wants someone to explain why. Victoria explained it. She explained the fault, the fix, the timeline for recovery. She did not explain Ethan Carter. She wasn't sure yet how to explain Ethan Carter. When the meeting ended and the board members were filtering out, one of them stopped beside her chair. His name was Douglas Mercer. He'd been on the board for 3 years. He was 62, silver-haired, the former CEO of 2 companies, and a man who wore his success the way Victoria wore her blazer, as something that belonged on him natural and unquestioned. He'd always been cordial to her. Professional. Supportive in the way of board members who believe the CEO is performing adequately. "Impressive recovery," he said. 6 weeks of production loss, and you still hit the quarterly projection. "The team worked hard," she said. "I heard you brought in outside help." He said it lightly, conversationally. Something in her went still. Word travels. "Always does in this industry." He smiled. "Who was it, a consultant?" "Someone with the right expertise," she said carefully. "Good instinct. Sometimes fresh eyes are exactly what you need." He picked up his portfolio from the table. "Though I'd be careful about who has access to the vehicle architecture documentation. Proprietary systems are proprietary for a reason." He said it pleasantly, the way you say something that's meant to land gently enough that the landing can be denied later. "Of course," she said, matching his tone. He left. She stood at the head of the conference table for a moment after the room emptied. Douglas Mercer had not asked who fixed the car. He'd asked who had access to the architecture documentation. Those were not the same question. She called Gerald from the parking structure. "The patent inquiry I asked you to trace," she said. "Can you cross-reference it against board members current and former?" Gerald's pause this time was longer. "That's a different kind of investigation, Victoria." "I know what it is. Can you do it?" "Give me 48 hours. She drove back to the office. She sat at her desk. She pulled up the production telemetry from the autonomous vehicle project and read it with the attention of someone who is no longer just looking for the fault they already found. She was looking for whether someone had wanted that fault to stay hidden. Then Friday afternoon, Gerald called back in 36 hours instead of 48. That told her something by itself. The patent inquiry 7 years ago, he said. It was made through a law firm, shell structure 3 layers, but the beneficial client at the end of the chain is a holding company called Arcadia Systems Group. She wrote it down. And Arcadia. Arcadia was acquired 4 years ago. It's now a subsidiary of Mercer Capital Partners. She put her pen down. Douglas Mercer. Douglas Mercer had tried 7 years ago to investigate the patent assignments of an aerospace engineer, who then voluntarily disappeared from the industry to become a mechanic in Ohio. And Douglas Mercer was now on the board of her company. And Douglas Mercer had 3 years ago recommended she hire the engineering consultancy that had overseen the autonomous vehicle project's development. The same project that had developed a fault nobody could find. She sat at her desk for a long time. She thought about the firmware update, 8 weeks ago. She pulled up the changelog. The update had been authorized by the engineering consultancy, the same consultancy Douglas Mercer had recommended. She cross-referenced the authorization signature against the personnel file. The engineer who had authorized the firmware update had previously worked for a company called Arcadia Systems Group. The room seemed to get very quiet. It was the specific quiet of a person who has just realized that what they thought was an accident was not an accident. That what they had been chasing as a technical failure was something else entirely. That the 6 weeks her team had spent looking for a software bug had been 6 weeks a saboteur had counted on. She reached for her phone and then stopped. Because if Douglas Mercer had the reach she now suspected he had, then using a company phone or a company server was exactly the wrong move. She took out her personal phone. She called her personal attorney. She said 3 sentences. Her attorney said 4 sentences back. The 4th was, "Don't touch anything on company systems until I get there." "I know," she said. "Victoria, I mean it. Nothing." "I know," she said again. She sat with her hands flat on the desk and her personal phone face down beside them, and she breathed slowly and deliberately, the way she'd learned to breathe in the first year of running a company when everything felt like it was on fire. And the only thing that kept her functional was the decision to stay calm. She thought about Ethan Carter. She thought about the way he'd looked at her Thursday in the parking structure when she'd said she'd misjudged him. The way he'd agreed, yes, that's not an excuse, without anger, without satisfaction, without any of the performance she would have expected from someone who had just been validated. She thought, I need him to look at this the way he looked at that engine. She thought, I need someone I can trust. She picked up her personal phone again. She didn't have his number. He'd dealt through Rick at the front desk both times. She called Carter Brothers Auto. Rick answered on the 3rd ring. "This is Victoria Ashford. I need to speak with Ethan Carter. It's important." A pause. The sound of the shop behind him. He's, Rick's voice dropped slightly. "He's actually not here right now. He left early. His daughter had a..." He stopped himself. "It's personal. He should be back tomorrow morning." "Can you give me a number where I can reach him directly?" Another pause. "I'd have to ask him that." "Rick?" She didn't say anything else. The weight of it was in the name. A longer pause. "I can leave him a message and have him call you. Tell him it's urgent. Tell him it's not about the vehicle or the project." She thought about how to say the next part. "Tell him I found something and I need him to help me understand what I'm looking at." She hung up. Then, in a house 22 miles away, Ethan was sitting in a kitchen chair beside a small girl who had fallen asleep on the couch in her school clothes, her purple folder still in her hand. She'd had a fever that afternoon, nothing serious. Dr. Reeves had been clear on the phone, viral rest and fluids, watch the temperature, but Ethan had left the shop the moment Rick had relayed the call from the school nurse. He'd carried her from the car to the couch and brought her water and crackers and sat in the chair beside her and watched her breathe the way he sometimes did, the particular watchfulness of a father who had been given more than one reason not to take breathing for granted. She was fine. She was going to be fine. He knew that. He also knew it didn't stop the watching. His personal phone buzzed. A message from Rick. He read it. He looked at Lily asleep on the couch with her purple folder. He texted Rick back. "I'll call her tomorrow morning." Rick replied in 30 seconds. She said urgent. Ethan looked at the word. He thought about what Victoria Ashford's definition of urgent probably was, given what he'd seen of her in the past week. He thought about the board meeting she'd mentioned. He thought about Douglas Mercer, whose name he didn't yet know, but whose existence he was about to learn. He replied, "Tell her 8 a.m. Then he put his phone down and went back to watching his daughter breathe. Saturday morning, 7:58. His personal phone rang. He answered. "Thank you for calling back," she said. Her voice was different from every previous version he'd heard. Not the commanding performance of Tuesday, not the careful precision of the subsequent calls. This was the voice of someone who was holding something heavy and had been holding it alone long enough that the holding was starting to show. Rick said urgent, he said. Yes. A breath. "I've found something. About the project. About the fault. It wasn't Ethan. I don't think it was an accident." He was quiet. "I think someone on my board has been systematically undermining this project. I think the firmware update 6 weeks ago was deliberate. And I think—" She stopped. He heard her decide something. "I think I need someone to look at what I've found and tell me if I'm seeing it correctly or if I've lost my mind." He thought about this. "Send me what you have," he said. "Not to the shop email. Do you have a secure file transfer?" A pause. "You know what that is?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer. "Who are you, Ethan?" He thought about Lily asleep on the couch the night before. He thought about Sarah. He thought about the conversation he'd had with himself in the kitchen at 5 a.m. the morning after the funeral, deciding what kind of father he was going to be. "I'm a man who looked at a machine once," he said, "and saw how it was supposed to work. Send me the files." Wow. She sent them 40 minutes later. He read them on his laptop at the kitchen table while Lily ate cereal. She was better. The fever gone, energy returning in the specific, unstoppable way of children. And she did her homework across from him without asking what he was reading, because she had learned with 8-year-old perception that when her dad read something at the table with that particular stillness, it was important. He read for 50 minutes. He found it in 30. But he read for 50 because he wanted to be certain. Yes, and the pattern was there. It was not subtle once you knew what to look for. The firmware update authorized by an engineer with previous ties to a competing interest. The fault isolation parameters updated in a way that would not immediately fail, but would degrade under specific load conditions, the exact conditions present in a government performance evaluation. The timeline of the degradation mapped almost perfectly to the evaluation date. If the fault had not been found and corrected, the vehicle would have failed the evaluation. Not dramatically, not in a way that would be immediately attributed to sabotage. Just a system that performed below specification, a contract lost on technical grounds. Messy. And the company that stood to win the contract if Ashford Technologies lost it was a subsidiary of Mercer Capital Partners. He sat at the kitchen table with the data in front of him. "Daddy," Lily said without looking up from her homework, "you're doing the face." "What face?" "The one where you figured something out but you don't like what it is." He looked at her. She was still looking at her homework. She was 8 years old. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's the face." He called Victoria. She picked up before the second ring. "It's there," he said. "The sabotage. It's in the data." A long silence. "Tell me," she said. He told her. All of it. Methodical, precise, without editorial, just the data and what it meant and how the pieces connected. He talked for 9 minutes. She didn't interrupt once. When he finished, the silence lasted 4 seconds. "Douglas Mercer," she said. "I don't know any names, I just know the data." "I know the name," she said, and her voice for the first time since he'd met her had something in it that might have been fear. "He's been on my board for 3 years. He recommended the engineering consultancy that oversaw the project." "You need a lawyer," Ethan said. "A good one. Not a company lawyer. Personal." "I already have one." "Good. And you need the data preserved. All of it. Chain of custody matters if this goes where it might go." "I know." A breath. "Ethan?" She stopped. "What?" I'm not sure why I called you instead of..." She stopped again. "Because you needed someone who would look at the machine," he said, "and not at the politics around it." A long pause. "Yes," she said, "exactly that." He looked across the kitchen table at Lily, who was still doing her homework, her pencil moving in the focused way it moved when she was thinking hard. "You're going to be okay," he said. "But you need to move quickly and carefully. Get your lawyer on the phone today. Don't communicate about this on company systems. And Victoria, watch who's in the room when this starts to surface." "I will." Another pause. "Why are you helping me?" He thought about it. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said. "And because someone is trying to take something that other people worked hard to build. I don't have patience for that. Even though I told you to get out of your shop 10 days ago." "Even though," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "You're a different kind of person," she said. Not a compliment exactly, more like an observation. The kind a scientist makes when they encounter something that doesn't fit their existing model. "I'm a mechanic," he said. She made a sound that was close finally to a laugh. "No," she said. "You're really not." He didn't argue with her. He hung up. He sat at the table. Lily looked up. "Everything okay?" she said. He looked at his daughter, her bright eyes, her purple folder, her complete and uncomplicated confidence that he would handle whatever it was. "Yeah," he said. "Someone's in trouble. We're going to help them figure it out." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her homework. He sat with the data in front of him and thought about what was coming. He thought about boardrooms and legal proceedings and the specific kind of damage a person like Douglas Mercer could do when cornered. He thought, this is going to get complicated. He thought complicated is just a machine nobody's looked at carefully yet. He opened a new document and started writing down everything he'd found in the data, methodical and precise, the way he'd always done it. Not for anyone else, just for himself. Just to make sure the record was clean and the logic was airtight before anyone started making decisions based on it. In the kitchen of a small house in Denton, Ohio, a man who had once walked away from one of the most prestigious careers in American aerospace engineering sat at a table across from his 8-year-old daughter and quietly built the case that would bring down a saboteur. He didn't know yet that by the following Thursday, he would be standing in front of Ashford Technologies' board of directors. He didn't know that Douglas Mercer would be in the room. He didn't know that what happened in that room would change things for both of them in ways neither one could calculate. He just worked. Careful, methodical, precise. The way he always worked. The way it turned out that mattered most. Sunday passed the way Sundays did in the Carter house, quietly, usefully, with the particular texture of a day that belonged entirely to them. Ethan made pancakes in the morning. Lily ate 4 of them and declared it a personal record which he neither confirmed nor denied, because he was fairly certain she'd eaten 5 once when she was 6 and feeling competitive about it. They did laundry together, which had somehow become a ritual. She sorted colors from whites with the focused authority of someone who took the responsibility seriously. And he folded, and they talked the whole time about nothing consequential, which was the best kind of talking. In the afternoon, she worked on the electricity project for Mrs. Garland's class. She'd drawn a diagram of a distributed power system on poster board based on the conversations they'd had at the kitchen table, and she wanted him to check it. He checked it. It was correct, not approximately correct, actually technically, architecturally correct. An 8-year-old had drawn an accurate distributed power distribution diagram on poster board with colored markers. "This is right," he said. She looked up. "All of it. All of it." She pumped her fist again. He'd noticed she'd picked that up from somewhere school. Probably, or a YouTube video, and it had become her specific gesture for satisfaction. And every time she did it, he had to work to keep his face neutral, because it made something in his chest want to come completely apart, in the best possible way. "Mrs. Garland's going to lose her mind," Lily said. "Probably," he agreed. Poets. It was the last quiet Sunday for a while. Monday morning, he drove to work and found a message waiting on his station, not from Rick. Not a work order, but a handwritten note in Rick's square block lettering. "Call Victoria Ashford. Personal cell. Urgent." He'd left the number. He called from the parking lot before he went in. She answered on the first ring. "My attorney filed the preservation order this morning," she said. No preamble, no hello. She'd moved into operational mode. He could hear it, the specific compression of her voice that happened when she was executing rather than deciding. All company systems, all communications, everything timestamped from 8 weeks ago forward. If anyone tries to alter anything now, it's obstruction. Good. My attorney also contacted the FBI's Economic Crimes Unit. There's a preliminary inquiry open as of this morning. A beat. This is moving fast. It needed to move fast, he said. Douglas Mercer doesn't know yet. We think. She paused. My attorney used the word think, and I don't love that word right now. No, he agreed. There's a board meeting Thursday. It was already scheduled quarterly review. My attorney's recommendation is that we don't cancel it. We don't change anything that would signal to Mercer that we know. He understood immediately. You want the evidence presented at the meeting, in front of the full board, on record, with the FBI inquiry already open. She took a breath. If we tip him off before Thursday, he has 3 days to move assets, destroy records, build a legal strategy. If we don't tip him off, we have 3 days to make the case airtight. What do you need from me? A pause, the kind that contained something she'd been working up to. I need you in that room, she said. He was quiet. Ethan. The technical evidence, the firmware logs, the fault pathway analysis, the authorization chain, my attorney can present the legal argument, but he's a lawyer, not an engineer. If Mercer challenges the technical interpretation, I need someone who can stand up in front of that board and explain exactly what the data shows and why it means what it means. Another pause. I need someone they can't rattle. He thought about that. He thought about boardrooms. He'd been in them before years ago in a different life. He'd never loved them, but he'd never been rattled by them either. Thursday, he said. 10 a.m. He thought about Marcus. He thought about Rick. He thought about a shop that was already backed up and a promise he'd made to have a transmission done by Wednesday noon. I'll be there, he said. Down Belme. He went inside. He told Rick he needed Thursday morning. Rick looked at him for 3 seconds, then said, okay, which was the entirety of their negotiation, because Rick was that kind of manager, and Ethan was that kind of employee. Marcus, who had again been pretending to do something nearby, said, Thursday. Yep. Is this the Ashford thing again? Yep. Is it? Marcus lowered his voice as though the socket wrenches might be listening. Is it like serious? Ethan looked at him. Yeah, it's serious. Marcus absorbed this. Do you need is there anything you need? Ethan picked up the transmission job. Get the fluid exchange station set up on Bay 2. I want to get this transmission done by Tuesday, so we're not behind Thursday. Marcus set up the fluid exchange station in approximately 45 seconds, which was a personal record. Tuesday went fast. The transmission was done by Tuesday evening. Wednesday went faster. Ethan worked through it with the clean focus of a man who has the next day sorted in his head and wants everything before it handled properly so he can give Thursday his full attention. Wednesday night, he sat at the kitchen table after Lily was asleep and read through his documentation one more time. Everything he'd pulled from the files Victoria had sent. The fault pathway. The authorization chain. The timeline overlap between the firmware update and the project sabotage. The connection between the authorizing engineer and Arcadia Systems Group. The connection between Arcadia and Mercer Capital Partners. It was clean. It was airtight. It told one story and one story only, and the story did not have alternate interpretations. He closed the laptop at 10:45. He went to bed. He slept because he was a person who had learned that rest was not optional, that you owed the next day your best and your best required sleep. He'd learned that from parenthood, which had taught him more practical things than any engineering program. Thursday morning, 5:15 alarm, oatmeal, Lily's braid, purple folder. He drove her to school, walked her to the door the way he did every morning, and she turned at the entrance and said, "Good luck today, Daddy." And he said, "How do you know I need luck?" And she said, "Because you're wearing the good shirt." And she disappeared through the door before he could respond to that. He drove to Ashford Technologies in the good shirt. Victoria met him in the lobby at 9:40. She was in full executive mode, dark suit, composed face, the specific posture of a person who has been running on 4 hours of sleep and is not going to let anyone in that building know it. "How are you?" he said. "Functional," she said. Then, like it cost her something, terrified. "That's reasonable," he said. "My attorney is already upstairs, the FBI liaison. It's not a formal proceeding today. She's just present as a fact witness to the inquiry. She arrived 20 minutes ago. And Mercer? His car is in the lot. He's here." She looked at Ethan steadily. "He doesn't know." "Good." They rode the elevator up, the 14th floor. The conference room had the specific tension of a space that had been carefully arranged. Victoria's attorney, a tall woman named Patricia Okafor, with the deliberate calm of someone who had done this before, stood near the window with a tablet and a leather folio. The FBI liaison, a quiet man in a dark suit named Agent Callahan, sat at the far end of the room with a notepad. The other board members were arriving, 4 of them, filing in with coffee cups and the mild alertness of people who expected a quarterly review and hadn't been told otherwise. Douglas Mercer arrived at 3 minutes to 10. He was silver-haired, well-dressed, the kind of man who occupied space with the ease of someone who'd never had to fight for it. He nodded at Victoria, scanned the room, saw Ethan standing near the wall, and his eyes stopped. Just for a moment. The briefest recalibration. "Victoria," he said, warm, easy. "Who's your guest?" "Someone with expertise relevant to today's agenda," she said. Mercer looked at Ethan for one more second. Something moved behind his eyes. "Of course," he said pleasantly and took his seat. Meh. The meeting opened with standard procedure. Minutes from the last meeting approved. Production update presented by Jonathan Reyes, who had been briefed enough to know his role, and was handling it with the careful steadiness of a man who understood the stakes. Reyes walked through the recovery timeline, the fault resolution, the return to production schedule. He was crisp and professional, and he did not look at Mercer. Then Victoria said, "Before we move to the contract evaluation update, I'd like to address something that arose during the fault analysis." The room shifted. Subtly, the way rooms shift when the temperature changes. "As you know, the fault in our autonomous vehicle project was isolated and corrected last weekend. What I need to share with the board today is that upon deeper review of the associated data, we have reason to believe the fault was not accidental. The silence was immediate. One of the board members, a woman named Sandra Chu, who had been on the board since the company's second year, set down her coffee cup. Not accidental, how? Victoria nodded at Patricia Okafor. Okafor stepped forward and connected her tablet to the room's display. The first slide came up a timeline clean and precise with the key events marked. Okafor began. She was good. She was very good. She laid it out with the economy of a lawyer who respects the intelligence of the room, the firmware update timeline, the authorization chain, the fault pathway, the competitive interest in the contract's outcome. She used plain language where she could, and technical reference where she had to, and she moved through it with a pace that didn't allow for interruption. Ethan watched Mercer. Mercer's face was doing something very controlled. He was listening with the attentive, slightly furrowed expression of a board member absorbing concerning new information. His hands were flat on the table. He had not moved them since Okafor began. He was good. Ethan gave him that. He was very good. Okafor concluded the legal framework and said, "I'd like to ask Ethan Carter to walk through the technical evidence." Every head in the room turned. Ethan pushed off the wall. He walked to the display. He looked at the room: 4 board members, an attorney, an FBI liaison, an engineering lead, and a CEO. And he felt exactly what he always felt when he stood above an engine that needed diagnosing. Focused. Quiet. Certain of the work. "The fault in this vehicle was a calibration mismatch," he began, "between a firmware update authorized 8 weeks ago and the fault isolation parameters in the power distribution controller. Individually, neither change would have caused a problem. Together, they created a condition where a genuine thermal fault in the control bus would be consistently misread by the diagnostic system as a false positive and cleared." He pulled up the telemetry data, the same data he'd read at that workstation on Saturday afternoon. This is the thermal load curve on the primary control bus over a 12-minute operational cycle. You can see the fault event here occurring consistently at the 9-minute mark, which corresponds to peak thermal load. Now watch what the fault isolation system does. He advanced the slide. It checks the fault signature against threshold parameters, but the threshold parameters it's checking against are from firmware version 7.2. The vehicle is running 8.1. The parameters changed in the update, so the system sees a fault that doesn't match its reference, classifies it as a ghost reading, and clears it, every time, without recording it. Sandra Chu said quietly, "Without recording it." "Without recording it," Ethan confirmed. "Which means 6 weeks of diagnostic logs show no fault. Your engineers were chasing a ghost in the software because the hardware evidence was being systematically erased the moment it appeared." Another board member, a heavy-set man named Robert Finch, who had barely spoken, said, "Systematically, that's a word with an implication." "Yes," Ethan said, "it is." He advanced to the next slide. The authorization chain, the engineer's name, the employment history, the connection to Arcadia, the connection to Mercer Capital. He didn't say Douglas Mercer's name. The data said it for him. He heard it the moment Mercer's composure broke. Not in his voice. Mercer's voice stayed level, stayed pleasant, stayed entirely professional. It broke in the sound of his chair, a barely audible shift of weight. The movement of a person whose body is making a decision, their mind is still insisting it hasn't made. "This is a serious allegation," Mercer said. His voice was exactly the right blend of concern and measured skepticism. "And I want to take it seriously. But a chain of corporate connections is not evidence of deliberate sabotage. There are a dozen innocent explanations for an engineer having previous employment at a subsidiary." Ethan looked at him. He didn't rush. He didn't perform. He just looked at Douglas Mercer across the conference table the way he'd looked at engines that were trying to tell him something they didn't have the vocabulary to say directly. "You're right," Ethan said. "Corporate connections alone don't prove intent." Mercer nodded the nod of a man who is about to be gracious in receiving acknowledgement. "Which is why," Ethan said. I want to talk about the parameter file. He advanced the slide. When the firmware update was installed 8 weeks ago, the installer had two options. They could apply the update with automatic parameter migration, which would update the fault threshold table to match the new firmware version. Or they could apply the update with manual parameter retention, which would preserve the old threshold values. He paused. Automatic migration is the default. It's the default in every installation guide, every technical manual, every best practice document associated with this system. To choose manual parameter retention, you have to actively override the default. You have to make a deliberate selection in the installation interface. He paused again. The installation log shows manual parameter retention was selected. The room was very still. Someone made an active choice, Sandra Chu said. Her voice was flat. To keep the old parameters. Yes, Ethan said. Someone who understood exactly what that choice would do to the fault detection system under thermal load conditions. He paused. This isn't an accident. This isn't a mistake. This is a fault that was engineered to be invisible. Robert Finch turned to look at Mercer. Mercer's face had not changed, but something behind it had. Ethan could see it the way he could see a component that was operating at its limit from the outside. Everything looked normal, but there was a frequency to it, a vibration almost too fine to detect, that said it was about to fail. I'd like to consult with my attorney before this conversation continues, Mercer said. Sir. Babe. Agent Callahan, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table for the entire meeting, said, Of course, Mr. Mercer. We'd also like to speak with you at your convenience. We've been in contact with your attorney since yesterday morning. The specific silence that followed that sentence was its own kind of evidence. Mercer looked at Callahan. He looked at Victoria. He looked at the display where Ethan's data was still on the screen, precise and clean, and completely immovable. Wishing. He stood up. He picked up his portfolio. I'll be in touch, he said to no one in particular. He walked out. The door closed. For approximately 5 seconds, nobody in the room made a sound. Then Sandra Chu exhaled a long, controlled breath and said, Victoria, how long have you known? Since Friday, she said. We moved as fast as we could. The FBI inquiry was opened Monday morning. And Finch looked at the display, at Ethan. And you. He said it without hostility, more like someone confirming the label on a component they hadn't correctly identified. You found all of this. The data found it, Ethan said. I just read it. Finch looked at him for a long moment. He was 65, had built 3 companies, and had the eyes of a man who could tell the difference between a person being modest and a person being accurate. That's not the same thing, he said. Most people looked at that data for 6 weeks and didn't find anything. They were looking for a software bug, Ethan said. I was looking for what the system was actually doing. Finch nodded slowly. Who are you? Ethan picked up his documentation folder from the table. I'm a mechanic, he said. From Denton. Finch looked at Victoria. Something passed between them, a question and an answer that didn't require words. Victoria said, He's the reason this company still has a contract. The meeting concluded 40 minutes later. Patricia Okafor stayed behind with Agent Callahan to coordinate the evidence handover. The board members filed out in the specific stunned quiet of people who need to process something before they can perform their normal professional functions. Victoria walked Ethan to the elevator. They stood waiting for it. The hallway was quiet. Through the glass wall of the conference room behind them, Okafor and Callahan were still talking. How do you feel? She said. Fine, he said. How do you feel? She thought about it. Like I've been running very fast towards something for a long time and I just reached it, and I'm not sure what the ground feels like when you stop. He nodded. That's normal. She looked at him. Is it? Yeah. He thought about the morning after Sarah died. About reaching the end of something and not knowing yet what the next thing was. It passes. You figure out what the next problem is, and you start working on it. She was quiet for a moment. Ethan? He waited. I owe you something. You don't. I do. And I don't mean money. She turned to face him more directly. I treated you with contempt when I walked into your shop. Not just rudeness, contempt. I looked at your uniform and your shop, and I decided I already knew what you were. He met her eyes. He let her say it. He didn't rescue her from it. I was wrong, she said. Completely wrong. And the degree to which I was wrong is... She stopped. It's uncomfortable. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. Yeah, he said. It is. I'm sorry, Ethan. He looked at her for a moment, not accepting it too easily, not withholding it as punishment, just taking it at face value the way a genuine thing deserves to be taken. I know, he said. I could tell you meant that. The elevator arrived. He stepped in. She stayed in the hallway, holding the door for one moment. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. Does it bother you? What I said, does it still? No, he said. And it was true. I stopped measuring myself against other people's opinions a long time ago. You have to when the work is the thing that matters. She looked at him. Machines only work, he said, when every small part is respected. She blinked. Something shifted in her face. Not the composure, but something underneath it. People are no different, he said. The elevator door closed. He drove back to Denton. The highway was clear, and the afternoon was starting to lean toward early dark, the way October afternoons did, the light going horizontal and gold. He drove with the radio low and his hands easy on the wheel, and his mind doing what it did after a job was finished, not replaying it, just releasing it, setting it down, making room for what came next. His phone rang at 4:15. Rick. You coming back in today? I can be there in 20 minutes. Nah, it's slow. Marcus finished the 2:15 appointment. I was just checking. A pause. You okay? Yeah. The thing today, it went fine, Rick. Okay. The sound of Rick deciding not to push further, which was one of the things Ethan valued about him. See you tomorrow. He picked up Lily at 5. She came through the door with her backpack and her purple folder, which now had the electricity diagram folded inside it, waiting for the science presentation on Friday. And she said, Daddy, the way she always said it, surprised and relieved and joyful all at once, like every reunion was still a small miracle. He picked her up. She was getting too big for it. He did it anyway. How'd it go? She said into his shoulder. Good, he said. The machine's fixed. The complicated one. The most complicated one I've seen in a while. She leaned back in his arms to look at his face the way she did when she was checking him, the same way he checked her looking for the thing underneath the surface report. Are you sure it's fixed? He thought about Douglas Mercer walking out of that conference room, about Agent Callahan's notepad, about Patricia Okafor's quiet, methodical efficiency, about the evidence clean and complete sitting in the custody of people whose job was to do exactly what needed to be done with it. Yeah, he said, it's fixed. She considered this, nodded. Okay, she said, satisfied in the way only children can be satisfied completely without reservation. He carried her to the car. She chattered the whole drive home about Mrs. Garland and the science project, and something Paige had done that was apparently still a matter of unresolved significance, and he listened and responded and asked the right questions, and the October light moved through the windows of the car as they drove, and he thought about what Victoria had said in the elevator hallway. Machines only work when every small part is respected. People are no different. Yet. He'd meant it when he said it. He'd meant it the same way he meant everything, not as a lesson, not as wisdom, just as a fact. He'd worked out slowly and thoroughly the way he worked out everything. He thought about how long it had taken him to understand it. Not in theory, he'd understood it in theory from the beginning, but in his own life, in the texture of the days he was living. The understanding that the work wasn't the point, that the point was the small parts. The oatmeal and the purple folder and the braid, and the way she said his name every afternoon like it was still new. The point was what you chose to be present for. He pulled into their street, parked in the driveway. Lily was already unbuckling before the car had completely stopped, which was a habit he'd given up correcting. She ran to the door. He sat in the car for a moment alone. He thought about what came next. Mercer's legal situation would proceed without him. He'd given the data, done the work, and the appropriate people now had it. Ashford Technologies would stabilize. Victoria would do what Victoria did, which was adapt and build and move forward with the particular relentless efficiency of someone who was, whatever her flaws, genuinely good at what she did. His life would go back to its rhythm. The shop, the work, the evenings at the kitchen table. He was okay with that. He was better than okay with that. He got out of the car. He walked to the front door. Lily had already left it open for him, knowing he was right behind her. He stepped inside. The house smelled like the oatmeal she'd microwaved after school, and the particular warm smell of a small home where someone is making something in the kitchen. Lily appeared in the doorway between the hall and the kitchen with a wooden spoon in her hand and flour on her sleeve. "I started the pancakes," she said. He stopped. "We had pancakes Sunday," he said. "I know." She held up the spoon. "But it's Thursday, and you had a hard day, and I looked up the recipe." He stood in the hallway of his house and looked at his 8-year-old daughter standing in the kitchen doorway with a wooden spoon and flour on her sleeve, making pancakes on a Thursday because she'd decided he needed them. He did not cry. He was very deliberate about not crying. But something in his chest did the thing it did sometimes. That specific movement, not quite pain, not quite joy, the thing he'd never found the right word for. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said seriously. "I haven't done the eggs yet, and last time I cracked them, I got shell in." "I'll do the eggs," he said, hanging up his jacket. "Okay," she said, satisfied again, and disappeared back into the kitchen. He followed her. The house was warm. The light was on. His daughter was making pancakes on a Thursday in October, and the complicated machine was fixed, and the work was done. And this, all of this exactly, this was the thing he had chosen. It was still the best choice he'd ever made. The pancakes that Thursday night were imperfect in the specific way that 8-year-old cooking is imperfect, slightly too thick on one side, slightly too thin on the other. One of them shaped like something that might have been Ohio, or might have been a dog, depending on your angle. Lily ate 3 of them with the satisfaction of someone who had produced something of genuine value. Ethan ate 2, and told her they were the best he'd had all week, which was true, and she accepted the compliment with the gracious confidence of someone who had expected exactly that verdict. He didn't tell her what had happened in that conference room in full detail. She was 8. She didn't need the full detail. What she needed, what she'd already given herself, was the simple knowledge that he'd gone, he'd done the work, and he'd come home. That was the story of her life with him distilled to its essential structure, and it was enough. They did dishes together. She dried, he washed. She dropped a fork and picked it up without being asked, and said sorry to the fork, which was a habit she'd had since she was 5, and which he had never once corrected because it seemed to him like a reasonable way to move through the world. He tucked her in at 8:45. She asked him to tell her something interesting. He thought for a moment. "Did you know," he said, "that the human heart generates enough electrical energy over a lifetime to drive a truck from New York to Los Angeles?" She stared at the ceiling. "How many times?" "About 32 times. She was quiet for a moment. "My heart too." He looked at her in the dim light of her room. "Your heart too." She absorbed this with the particular solemnity of a child who has been told something that connects to something larger than the moment. Then she said, "That's a lot of miles." "Yeah," he said. "It is." He kissed her forehead, turned off the light, stood in the doorway for a moment, in the dark. "Daddy." "Yeah. I think you did good today." "How do you know?" "Because you came home and made the eggs right," she said. "When things go bad, you forget about the shells." He stood in the doorway. He could not immediately speak. "Good night, Lily," he said finally. "Good night, Daddy." He pulled the door halfway closed and stood in the hall for 3 seconds, doing the thing he did sometimes, just holding it, not letting it pass too quickly, reminding himself that this was real. This was his. This was what he'd stayed for. Then he went to bed and he slept, and Friday came. He went. Lily's science presentation was Friday afternoon. He'd arranged with Rick to leave at 2, which gave him time to get to the school before the 3rd grade presentation started. He stood at the back of the classroom with 4 other parents and watched his daughter stand at the front of the room beside her poster board with the electricity diagram and explain, with the calm confidence of someone who understood what she was talking about, how distributed power systems worked and why it mattered when the parts didn't communicate correctly. Mrs. Garland did not technically lose her mind, but she did ask Lily 3 follow-up questions that she'd never asked a 3rd grader before, and afterward she pulled Ethan aside in the hallway and said in the careful voice of a teacher who has seen a lot of children and knows when she's seeing something different. "Mr. Carter, wherever Lily is learning to think the way she thinks, keep doing that." Chisholm. He drove her home with the poster board in the back seat and the windows down, despite the October cold, because she wanted them down, and he was not going to argue with a kid coming off a successful science presentation. She fell asleep in the car. He drove in the quiet of the highway with his sleeping daughter beside him and thought about the week, about the conference room and Douglas Mercer's controlled face and Patricia Okafor's methodical precision and the way Agent Callahan had said, "We've been in contact with your attorney since yesterday morning." He thought about Victoria standing in the hallway waiting for the elevator, saying the things she'd said with the specific difficulty of someone who was not accustomed to saying them. He thought, it's done. Whatever comes next in that legal proceeding, the work is done. The data is where it needs to be. The machine is running correctly. He thought, I did what I could do. That's enough. He did not know yet that it wasn't finished, that something was still coming, that the following Monday morning would bring a phone call that would ask him something he hadn't been asked in 7 years, and that his answer would matter in a way he didn't yet have the context to understand. The call came at 8:17 Monday morning. He was under a car. He always seemed to be under a car when she called. Rick's voice, "Ashford woman, personal cell." He slid out, took the phone. Carter. "Ethan." She sounded different. Not operational, not controlled, not the executive compression he'd heard all week. She sounded like someone who had slept and come out the other side of something and arrived somewhere new. "I have news." Good or complicated? Both. A breath. Douglas Mercer resigned from the board Saturday morning. His attorney contacted us. There's going to be a settlement negotiation. I can't discuss the specifics, but the FBI inquiry is proceeding independently of whatever settlement occurs. That's out of our hands now. Good, he said. The government evaluation has been rescheduled for 5 weeks from now. The production team is on track. Jonathan Reyes thinks we'll be ready. A pause. He asked me to tell you something. What? He said, and I'm quoting, "Tell the mechanic I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'd have looked at that data for another 6 weeks and not found it." Another pause. I think that was his version of a thank you. "Tell him I said he's welcome." I will. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her deciding something. There's something else. Okay. I've been thinking about what you said. In the elevator. Machines only work when every small part is respected. Another pause. I've been thinking about it a lot, actually. About what that means for this company. About what I've been getting wrong. He waited. I walked through this production floor last Friday, she said. I mean, really walked through it. Not the inspection walk, not the executive visit. I just walked through it and stopped and talked to people. The line technicians, the quality control team, the cleaning staff who come in at 5 a.m. She stopped. I don't know some of their names, Ethan. People who've worked in that building for years, and I don't know their names. That can be fixed, he said. I know. Her voice had something in it he hadn't heard before. Not humility exactly, because Victoria Ashford was not a humble person and probably never would be, but something adjacent to it. Accountability without performance. The real version. I have a board meeting next Tuesday. I'm proposing a company-wide initiative, restructuring how we recognize and compensate technical staff, line workers, support staff, across all divisions. It's going to be a fight with two of the remaining board members. They're going to call it inefficient. Is it? No. The data on employee retention and productivity in companies that invest in floor-level recognition is unambiguous. It's not inefficient. It's the most efficient thing I can do. A beat. I just hadn't been paying attention to the data. You're paying attention now, he said. Better late, she said quietly. Yeah. Another pause. Longer. He could tell this was the one she'd been building toward. Ethan, I want to offer you something. Victoria, hear me out. Her voice was firm. I'm not offering you a job. I know you said no. I know what your answer is. I'm not asking you to change your life. A breath. I'm establishing a scholarship program for single parents and skilled tradespeople who left professional careers for family. Engineering systems, technical fields. Tuition living stipend mentorship. Starting with 3 recipients this year, scaling to 20 per year within 5 years. She paused. I want to name it. I want your permission to name it. He was quiet. What do you want to name it? He said carefully. The Carter Fellowship. The shop was quiet around him. He could hear Marcus somewhere in the back, the sound of an impact wrench. He could hear the low traffic sounds through the bay door. He could hear his own breathing. That's... He stopped. Sarah Carter, Victoria said, and her voice was careful and gentle, in a way he hadn't known it could be. Your wife. If that's Ethan, if that's too much, or if it feels wrong, tell me. I won't be offended. I just thought... How did you know her name? Gerald's file. A pause. I'm sorry if that feels like an intrusion. I can... No, he said. His voice had gone quiet. The particular quiet of someone holding something very carefully. No, that's... He stopped again. He pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose and held them there for a moment. That's a good name. Yeah. Yeah. He took a breath. She would have hated having anything named after her. She was the most aggressively private person I've ever known. She would have told you to pick someone else. But, Victoria said, but she spent the last year of her life worrying that Lily would grow up without enough examples of people who chose family over ambition. She used to say it like it was going to be Lily's biggest challenge. Finding the examples. He paused. A scholarship for people who made that choice. She wouldn't have hated that. She might have actually... He stopped. She would have thought that was worth something. The silence between them was not empty. It was the kind of silence that has weight and texture that holds things in it. Then it settled, Victoria said quietly. Okay. Okay, she said. And then, thank you, Ethan, for all of it. You already thanked me. I know. I'm doing it again. He allowed this. You're welcome, again. He heard her exhale, a real one, not the controlled professional breath, the real kind. Get back under your car, she said. "I've kept you long enough." He almost laughed. It came out as something close to one. "Yeah," he said. "Take care of yourself, Victoria." "You too," she said. He handed the phone back to Rick, who had been standing nearby with the focused expression of someone very deliberately not listening. "You good?" Rick said. "Yeah." Ethan picked up the shop rag, wiped his hands. "I'm good." He slid back under the car. He worked in the quiet for the next hour without thinking about the call, without replaying it, without holding it up to the light and examining it from different angles. He just worked. The car had a suspension issue that was straightforward once you got underneath it and saw what was actually happening versus what the complaint form had described, which was usually how it went. You had to be where the problem actually was. You had to look at the thing directly. Marcus appeared at his feet at 11:15. "So," Marcus said. "So, was that the Ashford call?" "Yep." And the thing I helped with is handled. She's setting up a scholarship program." A pause. "For what?" "Single parents. People who left technical careers for family." Another pause. Longer. "That's because of you." "That's because she figured something out," Ethan said. "I just gave her the information." "Ethan?" Marcus's voice had shifted. Not the usual energetic curiosity. Something more careful. "Can I ask you something? You're going to regardless." "Fair. Okay." A pause. Do you miss it? The other stuff. The engineering, the whatever it was before all this." Ethan continued working. He tightened a bolt, checked the alignment, moved to the next point. "Sometimes," he said, "I miss the problems, the scale of them. But I'd miss what I have more." He paused. "There's no version of the other life where I'm there when she wakes up scared at 2 in the morning. There's no version where I know she eats breakfast, where I know she's okay." He moved to another bolt. "You can't have everything. You just have to be honest about which things you actually want." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's really straightforward," he said finally. "Most true things are." Marcus didn't say anything else. Ethan heard him walk back to his station. He worked in the quiet for another few minutes before Marcus's voice came back from across the shop, not directed at him, just released into the general air. "I'm going to call my mom tonight." Ethan didn't respond to that, but he heard it. The weeks that followed moved in the rhythm that Ethan had built his life around work-school pickups, cardiology, follow-ups, kitchen table conversations. The slow and steady accumulation of ordinary days that were examined correctly, anything but ordinary. He read about the Mercer situation in a business news brief 3 weeks after the board meeting. A brief item carefully worded, a board member of a major technology firm had resigned amid an internal compliance review. An outside inquiry was ongoing. The name of the firm was not mentioned. The nature of the sabotage was not described. It was the kind of corporate news story that barely made a ripple unless you knew what you were looking for. He put his phone away. He went back to the transmission he was rebuilding. 5 weeks after the board meeting, the Ashford Technologies autonomous vehicle passed the government performance evaluation. He didn't read about it in the news. He got a text from a number he'd saved under Victoria A. The text said, "We passed. Every benchmark. Contract confirmed. Thank you." He texted back, "Congratulations. That was your team." Her response came in 11 seconds. "It was, and yours." He looked at that for a moment. Then he put his phone back in his pocket and went to pick up Lily from school. She came through the door with a different folder this time, blue, not purple. She'd explained the transition 2 weeks ago with the gravity of someone making a significant organizational decision. Purple was for 3rd grade. Blue was for the new unit. He had not questioned this system. "Daddy, guess what?" "What?" "Mrs. Garland said my electricity project is going to the district science fair." He stopped walking. She kept walking, completely matter-of-fact, backpack bouncing, blue folder under her arm. He had to catch up. Lily? Yeah. That's... He chose the word carefully. That's a very big deal. I know. She looked up at him with the expression of someone who has been aware of this for approximately 2 hours and has had time to process it into a manageable fact. Will you help me make it better for the fair? Of course. I want to add the thermal fault part, the part about the car. She paused. I want to show how a system can be working fine but still be broken because it doesn't know what to look for. He looked at her. She looked back at him, patient, waiting. Yeah, he said finally. We can do that. Good. She reached up and took his hand as they walked to the car the way she did. Sometimes still not every day, but on the days when she felt like it, and he had learned to receive it without remarking on it, because remarking on it made her self-conscious. He just walked with her hand in his and matched his pace to hers. Daddy. Yeah. The scholarship thing, the one the Ashford lady is doing. He looked at her. How do you know about that? I heard you on the phone. I wasn't listening, I just... She reconsidered. Okay, I was a little listening. Uh-huh. Is it named after Mom? He walked 2 steps before answering. Yeah, it is. She was quiet for a moment. That's good, she said. Mom would have pretended she didn't like it. He exhaled. Yeah, she would have. But she would have liked it. Yeah, he said. She would have. Lily nodded, satisfied. They walked the rest of the way to the car in silence. The good kind. The kind that doesn't need filling. 6 weeks after the board meeting on a Tuesday afternoon, that was cold and clear, the way late November afternoons in Ohio. Get cold and clear, Ethan was finishing up a brake job when Rick called from the front that he had a visitor. He slid out from under the car. Victoria Ashford was standing in the middle of Carter Brothers' auto in dark jeans and a coat and flat boots. No silk blazer, no performance. She looked like a person who had driven somewhere specific to do something specific and had arrived. Marcus from across the shop made a sound that might have been a word. Ms. Ashford, Ethan said. Victoria, she corrected. I've told you. Victoria. He picked up the shop rag, wiped his hands. What are you doing here? I was in the area, she said. He looked at her. I wasn't in the area, she admitted. I drove here, 40 minutes. Okay. I wanted to tell you in person. She took a breath. The scholarship program. We announced it internally yesterday. The response from employees. She stopped. He could see her choosing between the executive version of the sentence and the real version. She chose the real one. People cried Ethan. Line workers, technicians, people who have been in that building for years, they heard the announcement and some of them cried. She paused. I've never made anyone cry before, not in a good way. That's the data working, he said. She almost smiled. Yes, that's the data working. She paused again. I also wanted to tell you that I've been thinking about what you said, about the parts, about respect. She looked around the shop for a moment at Rick behind the counter at Marcus, pretending very unconvincingly to be busy at the bays and the tools and the accumulated honest work of an ordinary place. I drove 40 minutes to tell you that I understand now. What you chose. Why you chose it. She met his eyes. I'm not sure I could do it. Give up what you gave up. But I understand why you did. And I want you to know that She stopped. I think it's the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen someone do. And I've seen a lot. The shop was quiet. Rick had stopped pretending to do anything at all. Marcus had gone completely still. Ethan looked at Victoria Ashford for a moment. At the woman who had walked into this same room 6 weeks ago in Italian leather heels and told him to get out. He thought about what it took for a person like her to say what she'd just said. The specific cost of it. "You didn't have to drive 40 minutes for that," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I did it." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Once. The nod of someone who has received something and acknowledged it without making it more than it needs to be. "Thank you," he said. "The fellowship launches in January," she said, shifting back to footing she was more comfortable on. "First cohort of 3 recipients. We've already had over 200 applications in 2 days." 200. 214 as of this morning. She paused. "There are a lot of people out there who made the choice you made, who needed someone to tell them that choice was worth honoring." Veritae. He thought about that. About 214 people who had put family above career and had been invisible for it. People who'd driven their kids to school and packed lunches and sat in hospital waiting rooms and missed promotions and conferences and moved to smaller cities and done all of it without a word, because the doing was the point, and the point didn't require an audience. "Yeah," he said quietly. "There are." She extended her hand. He shook it. Her grip was the same as the first time, firm, direct, no hesitation. "Take care of your daughter," she said. "That's the plan." She turned and walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame and turned back just for a moment. "Ethan." He waited. "Never judge someone by their uniform." She said it like she was reading it from somewhere, like it was something she'd written down and memorized, which he suspected it was. "I'm going to put that on the wall of my office." "That'll confuse your board," he said. "Good," she said. "They need confusing." She walked out. The door closed. Marcus stood very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then he turned to Ethan with the expression of a man who has just watched a scene in a movie and cannot process that it was real. "Did she just—" "Yeah," Ethan said. "Did you just—" "Yeah." "And you're just going to go back to—" Ethan picked up the shop rag, looked at the brake job waiting in the bay. "Yeah," he said. "The Hendersons need their car by 4. Marcus stared at him, then at the door, then at the ceiling. "You know," Marcus said to the ceiling, "I used to think this was a boring job." Ethan slid back under the car. The months that followed moved the way good months move, with enough weight to know they're real and enough lightness to know you're okay. November became December. December became January. And the Carter Fellowship launched with its first 3 recipients, a single father in Georgia who'd left structural engineering for his daughter, a woman in Michigan who'd stepped away from software development to care for her aging parents, a veteran in Colorado who'd put a promising career in electrical systems on hold when his wife got sick, and the announcement, which Victoria had not told him was coming, appeared in his text messages on a Wednesday morning as a link to the press release. He read it in the parking lot of Lily's school, waiting for the bell. The fellowship description used Sarah's name. It said what it was for. It said what it honored. It said the words clearly and without apology. The people who chose family over career, who brought their brilliance to smaller rooms, who were extraordinary in ways that official records didn't capture. He read it twice. He put his phone away. The bell rang. Lily came through the door with her blue folder and her backpack, and the district science fair ribbon second place, which she had initially been disappointed about, and then decided was respectable because she'd explained the first place. Kid had done a project on water filtration systems, and water was important, and she said, "Daddy," and he picked her up even though she was definitely too big for it, now definitively no argument possible. She put her arms around his neck. Troy. He held her in the parking lot of her school on a January morning with the cold in the air, and the other kids streaming past, and the parents collecting their children. The way parents have always collected their children, with the specific mixture of relief and love that never quite becomes routine, no matter how many times you do it. "How was your day?" he said. "Good," she said. Mrs. Garland said the thermal fault part was the best part of my whole project. She's right. She asked where I learned it. Lily leaned back to look at his face. I said my dad taught me. She said she figured. He looked at his daughter, at her 8, almost 9-year-old face, which had his eyes and Sarah's chin and an expression that was entirely its own, entirely hers, something he hadn't seen in either of them and didn't have a name for. Except for the thing he sometimes caught himself thinking about when she wasn't paying attention. That it was the face of someone who was going to do something extraordinary someday in whatever room she chose to walk into. What do you want for dinner? He said. Pancakes, she said immediately. It's not Sunday. I know, she grinned, but it should be. He carried her to the car. He buckled her in, even though she was capable of doing it herself because she let him, and on the days she let him, he took it because he knew she wouldn't always. He walked around the car and got in and started the engine and pulled out of the school parking lot and drove them home through the January afternoon with the heater on and the radio low, and his daughter in the back seat telling him everything that had happened since 8 this morning. Every significant moment, every social drama, every small and irreplaceable detail of a day he hadn't been there for, but was being given now piece by piece because she wanted him to have it. He listened to every word. Victoria Ashford, 6 weeks later, stood in front of her entire company at an all-hands meeting and said the sentence she'd told Ethan she was going to say. She'd practiced it. She'd revised it twice. She said it in front of 1,400 people, most of them on screens from different buildings. Some of them in person, all of them expecting a quarterly update and a strategy review, and the usual architecture of corporate communication. She said, never judge someone by their uniform. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is carrying the greatest strength. She did not tell them where it came from. Some things you keep. And in Denton, Ohio, on an ordinary Tuesday morning in February, Ethan Carter came into Carter Brothers Auto at 6:55, made the coffee, pulled the first work order of the day, and slid under the first car of the morning. He lay on his back in 42 inches of crawl space with a drop light and a torque wrench and the clean practice silence of a man who is exactly where he chose to be. The work was in front of him. His daughter was in school. His wife's name was on something that would outlast both of them. The shop smelled like oil and coffee, and the particular kind of honest work that doesn't need anyone watching to be worth doing. He thought about none of this while he worked. He just worked. And outside the morning went on becoming itself ordinary and irreplaceable and entirely sufficient the way all the best mornings do. Some men measure their lives in titles and salaries and the size of the rooms they're allowed to enter. Ethan Carter measured his in pancakes on Thursdays in braids done right in a purple folder found on the third shelf behind the dolphin book, in a little girl's heartbeat that a doctor once called remarkable, and that he had called from the very first moment the whole point. He was right. He had always been right, and he would go on being right every morning for the rest of his life.